Hello and welcome to the Screen Chronicles. I'm Colby. With me as always is Steve, and today we're joined by a very special guest. He has worked on series such as Doctor Who and Killing Eve, amongst many others. He was the director of photography for 9 episodes between seasons 4 and 5 of The Last Kingdom, and he's a member of the British Society of Cinematographers. Tim Palmer, welcome to the Screen Chronicles.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Colby. It's a privilege to be in your company. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Tim. We're huge fans of The Last Kingdom, is how we know your work originally. And the Last Kingdom has always had a great look and feel to it. And a lot of the episodes you worked on, I think, were really unique looking as well.
Oh, what can I say? Thank you very much. It's been a show that's really been very close to my heart, and I feel very lucky to have been involved in it for such a long time. And it's up a tremendous amount of creative opportunities through every episode, all the directors I've worked with, the series that I've worked on, the looks, the designer, and the production. The production company are very generous with the creative freedom that they allow their heads of department. So I've not had any impediments to any stylistic direction I want to take the show in at all. It's been
very cool.
Been a lot of fun. When I came in on series 4, Chaz Baines, who's the lead DP on series 1 to 3, did such a magnificent job. I mean, he really set the tone of the show and the look of it, and I was just basically following in his footsteps. But I did have a mandate not to change it, but just to sort of give it a different feel in a way, because the series alternate in terms of the times of year they're set in.
Sure.
So the last series that Chaz did was a winter series, and the first series that I did was a summer series. So that immediately was going to change the way it looked. And then the last series I did, series 5, was a winter series. So I kind of enjoy all the seasons with my input and my work.
Before we dig into some more of the juicy details of what you did, a lot of our listeners and people watching are fans of Last Kingdom. We have spoken to a DOP before. You mentioned Chaz Bain, but could you tell us a little bit about what a DOP, a director of photography, what you do for the show, for the people listening?
Okay, well, the director of photography is, there's so many ways to describe it. Ultimately, is in charge of the look of the show, and is an overall supervisor, for want of a better word, of the lighting and the camera work, and decides basically how the pictures are going to look and how you expose the negative or digital signal, etc., whatever you want to call it these days, how you choose to translate what you see in front of you in the real world onto what people are going to see on their screen. So all those visual decisions, the director of photography's responsibility. And you work very closely with the director and the production designer, because the production designer builds the sets that you have to photograph. So often well, all the time, actually, especially on The Last Kingdom, I'm involved with the designer at a very early stage, looking at models and discussing what lenses we're going to be using and angles of view so that he can build the sets to suit the lens choices we're going to make. And he can build in the light, a lot of the practical lighting into the sets that I think are going to help with the overall photographability of the set, in terms of where the fires are going to be, where the wall sconces, where the candles are, how high the ceilings will be in order not to see the set, where the windows, all those sorts of decisions are done in collaboration with the designer, from my point of view. And then I'm the director's right-hand man, really. He or she will have the overall idea of the show, the way he or she wants it to look and how they want to photograph it. And then it's my job to translate those ideas and that vision into something real that, the audiences will be able to physically see.
Yeah.
Cool. And those meetings you have about the set design, does that take place very early on in the process?
It does. It does take place because the sets take a long time to build. It could be sort of 2 months 2 months before we get to photographing the set, those preliminary design decisions are being made, because they're certainly on The Last Kingdom, the sets are so substantial. Dominic Hyman, the designer, just builds, he builds real buildings. It's not buildings where you can
a fantastic job.
take a wall out because you want to get the camera there, or once it's up, that's it. So, it has to be exactly right.
So is there more pressure then in sort of the Last Kingdom scenario to make those decisions early on, knowing that you might not have flexibility later?
I think so, yes, very much so. I mean, case in point was on series 4 when there was the big sailing to Bebenberg, when Uhtred and the gang are on the boat. They leave, they sail up the coast, and they go to the Sea Gate, the Bebenberg Sea Gate. And that was an enormous build on the in a tank in Fott Studios in Budapest. A tank is a gigantic swimming pool, basically.
Right.
About an acre.
You can fit a Viking ship into.
Exactly. 2 Viking ships in it, plus all the support boats and all the divers, and saved everything else. We planned that really to the nth degree, because there was a lot of visual effects with big blue screens. We had scale models of the set that I put lenses, sort of miniature cameras with lenses on, so we could see exactly what the camera was going to see from the water, which is quite tricky because you're sort of low, relatively low. Right. You can't fly up. So you had to build the sets to certain elevations and widths. And then when we were inside the Sea Gate looking out, knowing exactly where the jetties were going to be situated, so you get the points of view from the soldiers. So that had to be planned in great detail. And we spent many weeks pushing little balsa wood models around a set to get that right. And it worked, all that planning worked fine, because once we were on that set for about a week, I think, filming, and it went like pop. Every shot just slotted in perfectly. We never had to really think about anything once we got going, because it all worked.
We talked with Chaz Bain again, who you mentioned before, and he mentioned like when they started, they used a lot of like natural lighting and elements like that. What was your sort of approach when you came in and you started taking over for season 4 and 5?
I mean, very, very similar. It's if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
It is a very naturalistic show. It's a period film. The only lighting is daylight, moonlight, and firelight. Really, that's all that existed. So you have to honor that principle. I mean, of course, we had a lot of lighting because, you need to light a lot for those big sets. The studio sets, the Great Hall in Winchester is an enormous set with big windows. So you got to put light through the windows, but the light, it's only ever got to emulate daylight, whether it's sunny or overcast or moonlight. There's quite a lot of lighting, but it's always as invisible and naturalistic as possible, because with all the firelight, you always have to supplement candlelight and firelight with a bit of additional stuff. Otherwise, it can look too, I don't know how sort of technical we want to get, but if you can, with sort of modern cameras, you can expose just with the candlelight and the firelight, and you get a good exposure with the high-speed cameras, but it makes the flames really burn out. Personally, I think it looks better when you're shooting stuff with candles and fires, that there's color in the flames. You still feel that richness in the color, which means you sort of have to underexpose a little bit and then bring in a little bit of supplementary lighting to get the light on the faces to simulate the light from the candles. I mean, I think when I look back at a lot of the interior scenes, they feel very warm and rich, and you're really going to get a sense of that deep orange candle light. That's because I actually did quite a bit of lighting to get that look.
Yeah, and I especially felt that warm sort of feeling in Winchester, in the Palace of Winchester a lot. And I always thought about too, when the light is sort of coming through the windows, it does look really natural. And I'd think to myself, like, is this actually daylight that they're using? Or probably not. It's probably like some sort of light they're putting in, but it looks like it could be daylight.
No,
so you've done a really good job of that.
Well, thank you. No, and I had a great, fantastic lighting team. But I quite enjoy those Winchester sets, because especially that Great Hall, because you have an excuse to do something different every time you go in there. You can You can do sort of shafts of sunlight. You can make it very gloomy and overcast. You can do sort of shafts of moonlight with sort of smoke effects and beams, or you can make it very soft. And the set lends itself to experimentation. And I mean, that's just me. I get bored quite quickly. So if I'm on the same set, I try and do something different every time rather than kind of slip into a comfort zone and just stick with what I know works.
And we've seen other shows of the same sort of time period too, where the lighting doesn't feel as natural, or there'll be like a great hall scene and it's almost like it's lit up by LED lights or something in the ceiling, which, The Last Kingdom never felt like that, which is great. But is it difficult when you're not using natural light to simulate natural light?
Well, it's interesting that it's an interesting point that you bring up there, and because let's talk about the Great Hall set in Winchester, because when I started on series 4, literally the first day I was on set in pre-production, I went into that Great Hall set, and it's a huge room, but it had no ceiling. It was a studio set without a ceiling, so all the lighting could be brought in from above if you needed to. I looked at it and the first thing I said is, we're going to see off the top of the set. The moment the camera gets down low, there's such a huge set that if you want to have kind of graphic low angles, which I knew that the director liked, we were going to be off the set. A bit like if you can see on my Zoom at the moment, you see the ceiling up there. That's what there would have been a black hole. So what was happening in previous series is that they were having to kind of keep the camera always up at that height. Not to see off the ceiling. I know that the director wanted to be down here. It's a kind of a personal stylistic thing. I like sets to be like a real location. So I don't like studio sets with no ceiling. I like a hard ceiling across the set so that you can shoot anywhere you want. It's a sort of Stanley Kubrick. If you look at all of his movies, he always has a real ceiling in his sets. And I think it immediately imparts a sense of authenticity to the set, and it makes it feel like a real place. So I said to Dominic, the designer, that I'd love to have a hard ceiling on this big set, and he kind of furrowed his brow because he knew it was going to be a big cost. But I took a lot of pictures and I did some sort of test shots of the angles that we wanted without the ceiling, and he and the production company immediately could see the necessity for that. So they put in that big ceiling, and it transformed the set, because suddenly it felt like a really real space where you could put the camera anywhere you wanted and shoot any which way you like, and you never had to worry about seeing something that you didn't want to see. It opened up the opportunity for really, really graphic low angle shots where you're tracking sideways along and people coming in and out and the king, and you see the ceiling behind him. So in terms of naturalism, it actually made it a lot easier because there are no choices. You don't have the option to light from above, so you can't light from above. So you have to light through the windows, and only through the windows. So if you know what you're doing, then it's automatically just going to look very real, because that's the way the lighting would have been.
Has there ever been any instances where, because of the logistics of sets or just maybe like an idea that it just, when you go to set and you try it out, it just doesn't work? Is there anything that happens like that?
I'm sure it does. Usually in small spaces. It's always in like tiny spaces that you get stuck. It's mainly because it's not from, I've never been stuck with lighting, but it's often in small spaces you get stuck with the camera because you can't get back far enough. You always end up with the back of the camera sort of wedged into walls, and it can make the shot less sort of gratifying because you end up having to go closer on a much wider lens than you might want to do to kind of take action in. It just becomes a question of sort of montage, really, and working out the shots. But as I said, small sets are always fiddlier and take longer to shoot and get the shots right in than a big set. But lighting wise, I mean, yes, what can I say? It's going to happen, so you're prepared for it, but it still happens nevertheless. Is that when you're in a sort of exterior, sort of a daylight set that's built that's tied into like an exterior location. So, for example, the Efferwich big set in Series 5, the York set. So that was built to kind of lead right into the big courtyard, and it had windows on one side, windows on the other side. When you've got scenes, kind of quite dark scenes inside, looking towards the exterior, which is south facing, when the sun is out, it's extremely bright outside, and it's dark inside. So it's quite, it can be difficult to control the contrast. Usually I could put big nets outside the door, but then if there's soldiers and horses walking backwards and forwards, obviously you can't do that. So you have to find ways to either kind of, it's difficult to control the sun. So ultimately it comes down to finding ways to scheduling the day so that you're only looking in certain directions when you know the light is going to be right. But inevitably that can all go reels of cotton sometime, and you're stuck with it. So that's it really. But I find, occasionally when things like that happen, the audience doesn't, I'm far more bothered by it than the audience.
Right. Because we don't notice.
You don't really
notice. You mentioned big sets and small sets, and a lot of the episodes you did, you go from big open spaces, battles and duels outside, to the political scenes that are indoors and in those tighter spaces. What's the big difference you have between those, and what do you prefer? What do you prefer between those sorts of things?
I mean, the big battles are very sort of mechanical in a way. There's not much emotion. There's not a great deal of subtlety to the photography and the lighting and the camera work. It's just big, busy shots. Put as many cameras as you can onto a scene that's been choreographed by a stunt coordinator, where this person does that person does that, this camera's here, that camera's there. Right, that bit's done. Let's get on to the next bit. When you're actually filming it, it seems almost like play school sometimes. You think it's like kids in a playground, like with their wooden swords, just hammering away at each other. But obviously, when you see it all cut together, it's incredibly visceral and powerful and brutal.
Yeah.
So in terms of the actual physical filming, as a cinematographer who's sort of creating drama with lighting and sort of considered camera moves and human interest and characterization, I really enjoy the sort of the political scheming and machinations of big group scenes with actors, because you kind of really can get under the skin as a cinematographer. The battle scenes, I enjoy it because it's a lot of really challenging technical problem solving, because you're changing light all the time and you're working out how to make sure the scenes match consistency, and how the lighting can be consistent on a scene that's going to last for 2 or 3 minutes on the screen, but that will take you, potentially, 2 to 3 weeks to film over a period of time. And you've got sunny days, cloudy days. You've got days where the things don't go to plan, so you end up filming at the end of the day when you're losing the light, so you're having to light things in and create daylight when it's dark. So it's good fun technically to do that, but I think emotionally I really enjoy the drama of the sort of the talking scenes.
Gotcha. No, before you became involved in The Last Kingdom, were you already watching the show, or were you a fan of the show at all?
Yes, because I've worked a lot with John East, who's one of the Last Kingdom staple of top directors. We did Killing Eve together, and medical drama called Critical. And I think it was when we were doing Critical that he was going on to do his first stint on The Last Kingdom. So we talked a lot about it then, and he would always report back to me. And then when we did Killing Eve, he was off to do it again. So I've certainly always watched his episodes, because I like to see how he handles different types of material. So yes, I was familiar with it.
Great. And then how did you end up becoming involved in it?
The lead director of Series 4 was Ed Bazalgette, who I'd worked with on a television drama quite a few years previously. And he must have thought that I might be a good fit. You never know how these things work. I don't know. I'd not worked with Carnival Pictures before. I hadn't worked with a production company, so I was new to them. So I think, yes, I think it was Ed that must have sort of pushed for me and got me on board. So,
cool.
But you know, as I say, you never know, you know, what goes on in those back rooms.
Had you ever worked on a show like The Last Kingdom before?
No, I had, because I did Strike Back, that HBO Cinemax. I mean, it's completely different, but it's about the sort of British SAS equivalent of a kind of Navy SEAL squad that go off around the world, saving the world from terrorist attacks. And so there was a lot of that, and we filmed that in Malaysia. So that was a kind of a very action-centric series, but modern, you know, it was all gunfire and explosions. But, you know, in terms of action, yes, that's the closest that I'd come to something like The Last Kingdom. Generally, I've sort of tended to work on much more sort of intimate dramas, a lot of police procedurals, a lot of detective shows, sort of psychological thrillers and dramas. So it was a really good break for me to kind of get onto something with such, you know, with action and sets on such a large scale. And it was actually surprisingly easy because, you know, people involved were so good that, you know, it didn't take long to get with the program.
Yeah.
When you are working on a show too, like the Last King, when you're going on where it's a season and then there's another DOP taking over and those sorts of things, do you all sort of work with the story too and try and imagine like how the story's going to go and decide how that's going to influence how you go? Because I know like the first episode of season 4, it was a really lighthearted kind of episode. It was like a reintroduction, everyone again, and it felt very sunny and it was like bright. And as the season goes,
it was in summer. It was a summer.
Yeah,
it was a summer shoot, that one. Yeah, so those sorts of decisions are very much made by the director and the producers in terms of continuity of the script and the story. I mean, I would never ask a director of photography that's following on from me to do exactly what I did. I'd always say, you know, just do your own thing because you're you, but it's the show, so it still has to look like the show. So, but do it in your own way. And in the same way, I'm, you know, when I come in and follow on from someone else, I'll do my own thing, but it'll still look like the show. The audience won't suddenly think that you're shooting a musical as opposed to a, you know, film noir black and white thing. So I did sort of bring in some kind of color ideas into season 4. I kind of introduced a camera filter that I've been using for a long time. It's called a Storm Blue filter. It's like a cyan type filter. And I used it on Killing Eve as well, because it it gave exactly the right kind of patina to the show without having to go and create any sort of color effects in post-production. And what it does is it just puts a sort of subtle amount of blue into the shadows, but it keeps the skin tones looking quite fresh and natural. But it immediately gives an interesting kind of split toning to the color of the negative. I'm just calling it the negative just as a generic term because I never know whether to say digital signal or digital file, and so just say the negative for the sake of argument. So I introduced that, and I did a lot of tests and ran them by the producers at Carnival and showed them how it would look, and they really liked it. So I introduced that at the beginning of season 4, and all the other DPs used that filter on their episodes too. And it was the same on season 5 as well. And they all loved it. You know, they thought, God, this is great. You know, I've never used this filter before, but it suddenly looks like it just gives a really beautiful period look to, especially, especially to the day exteriors and in winter, because it makes the winter feel really kind of wintry, but it keeps the warmth of that low winter sunlight on the skin. So it's a really quite a magical look. So basically that's the only sort of artistic stamp that I made on the series that I asked the other DPs to observe. And because it made the opening episodes, it gave them such a distinctive look that if you hadn't used that filter, I know for a fact that they would have asked in post-production to try and emulate that look in the grade. And it'll never look the same as if you know, when you can get it in camera. So
And is it critical to like meet with like the next DOP, for example, like end of episode 2 is a cliffhanger in season 4, and then again end of episode 3, there's a scene that's sort of cut to go to episode 4, where I think you guys sort of change blocks.
Yes. So it is important. I mean, because there are always certain discussions that happen at that point. You know, when it's almost when the same scene.
It's the same scene, right?
Goes over from one block to another block. Sometimes actually the director so for example, there was discussions whether the Andy Hay, who was the block 2 and 3 director, whether he would actually direct the scenes from episode 4 that directly continue on because it's all part of the same scene, or whether the block 4 director would have come in and direct the end of episode scene from block 3 because it's all part of the thing. So sometimes that does happen. In this case, it didn't. We just literally, we filmed us, where was it? I can't remember his name now. The guy who the brother of Sigtrygger's brother, who puts his hand in.
Rongvalder in episode 3 here.
Rongvalder. That's right. So that scene where he kind of does the trial and he puts his hands in the vat of boiling water and picks up the iron bar.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, my episodes that I was doing, we filmed up to the point where he holds it up, taking his hands out of the water. And then Paul Wilmshurst and Ashley Rowe, Paul, the director, and Ashley, the DP, on episodes 4 onwards, then they shot the continuation. So essentially, we shot until midday. Mm-hmm. And then Andy and I went off to shoot some other scenes on another part of the set. And Paul and Ashley came in, and because all the sets were there, and even though it was, you know, a week or 2 before Paul's official start to his filming, but because everything was there, they brought him in to kind of direct the rest of that, his part of the scene. And actually he ended up shooting quite a few establishing shots. So, you know, there's a bit of, you know, sometimes there's
like
this
overlap,
crossovers there.
Sure.
But I think, you know, looking at it, I don't think you would think that it was 2 different directors and 2 different DPs shooting that scene.
Absolutely not. In either case that I brought up, I was surprised that it was a different director and different DOP going into the next scene, because it just feels like that would have all been shot at once.
Yeah.
And then like they would have just clipped it or something. But speaking of that trial scene, though, I love the shot when Rongvalder lifts the bar.
Yeah.
Where the camera sort of comes out of the water with the bar and sort of focuses on him from below.
Yeah.
That was,
well,
cool.
I just did that on a GoPro.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I had the camera in the water.
Right.
Just sort of basically I couldn't see, you know, you can't monitor it or anything. I just kind of guessed what the frame was. And as he brought his hands up, I brought the camera up and guessed what the frame was.
It worked well. I guess that's where your skill comes in. That's great.
Well, when you know cameras and lenses so well, you can often just see the shot without having to look through the camera. You always know the difference between it being like that or being like that, just knowing the frame. I mean, I remember once shooting a commercial. We were on a hot head, you know, remote head, and the camera started looking down into an open grave, and then as it booms up and spirals around and then ends up down looking at the mourners on the side of the grave. Just as the camera was starting to boom up, and I was operating remotely on the wheels, just as the camera started to boom up, the video cut out. They didn't cut the camera, they just kept going. And just by kind of looking at where the camera was and just feeling what was going on, I kind of continued the shot, and the framing actually was perfect from start to finish. It was probably the best take, actually. So
it's all you just got to use your natural instinct. And,
it was like a bit of a Jedi moment, that I think.
Hey, cool.
When you're out with family and friends, are you like the designated picture taker then, or like, oh, Tim's got us here?
Well, I try not to be. I kind of, but it does end up being that way sometimes.
Colby just sent me a picture yesterday of the scene you did with Ethelred it was season 4, episode 5, when he's dying and getting taken care of, and how you had used another painting to sort of influence how the look of the shot went with that. And
yeah.
How do you sort of plan that out then, I guess? Or are you there that day and you're like, oh, this would be great?
No. There was a lot of thought that went into that one, because sort of emotionally, I sort of had a feeling that I wanted it to feel very almost spotlit, that scene. It was such a kind of an ethereal moment, especially with Ethelflaed and by his bedside, and the way he was almost like a kind of Pieta dying there, that awful long slow death, and it just felt like the focus became more and more intense on him as he was dying. It wasn't just like taking to his bed, closing his eyes, and off he goes. It was just It was a horrible drawn out moment, and I just thought I just wanted visually to kind of enhance that at every stage. And I felt like, well, with the lighting, it could just become more and more intense as the inevitable moment approached. I mean, Caravaggio is a very sort of common cinematographer's reference point.
Okay.
So in the flagellation, there is that moment where he's being lifted up out of his bed and he's in that shaft of light from the window. And I just thought, well, that is the picture I had in my head when I was trying to conceive of this moment. So I basically just lit it that way. I just used little tiny spotlights hidden in the ceiling to look like shafts of daylight coming in, or actually it was a night scene, so moonlight. Sometimes it doesn't really matter. It's kind of doesn't really matter what the light is, as long as it is emotionally meaningful. But it became very focused on him, and it because it's unusual. Usually the convention, certainly with most of the work that I do on The Last Kingdom, and most of the work that's done these days, is to light quite very softly, but in a very controlled way. It's become a sort of visual signature style over the last 10 years. And, using small, hard sources is quite old-fashioned really now. Okay. That's what I did. And what it kind of brought back a lot of the ways that I used, the way I grew up lighting before we had those, all those big soft LED lights. We had to use just tungsten and then really shape the light. But it reminded me about how lovely it is to work that way, because you don't have to work that hard to make the shadows fall off and go dark. Whereas with digital, usually it's so difficult to actually make things go dark because the camera sees everywhere. It's just sees everything all the time. So you're constantly just cutting the light to try and keep some shape to the lighting. But actually, when you just use small, hard sources, well, bingo, it's there, done.
I'd say that whole episode 5, it was, for me, story-wise, it was a little bit slower. But as far as visually, I remember that one being just visually interesting. Like, when all the elder men are talking at the table, and Ethelred when he's getting killed, like twisted his head to death from and then like Edith when she's like looking through and she's seeing this murder happening.
That's right, she's looking through. Well, I'll send you some pictures, because that was interesting the way we shot that, and I'm glad you respond to that in that way, because I felt the same from a kind of lighting and drama point of view. It was extremely rewarding, and it felt like we could combine all the elements of lighting and camera work to tell a very emotional, powerful story. And I felt the same with episodes 7 and 8 in series 5, which were, again, probably the only big action set piece scene was Breda's death.
Breda versus Uhtred.
Apart from that, it was all quite interior, and that whole last 10 minutes of episode 8 where they're all facing off against the king, that was a 10-minute scene. That, and you read it on the page and you think, God, how are you going to make that interesting for the audience visually so that it kind of keeps them going? But it went by really quickly. I thought
I thought that was a great scene.
It
It
didn't.
was an awesome scene.
It didn't hang. But anyway, going back to that series 5 scene with Ethelred's death. I mean, it was something I'd started with John East when we did that medical drama Critical. I introduced the use of a periscope lens, like a probe periscope lens, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with them. This is one by Optics. It's a very long optic, and you can also have it so it's in a kind of a dog leg configuration. Okay. And it focuses very close. You can get the lens right up to your eyeball and focus on your eyelashes from there.
Okay.
But it enables you to get the camera into places that you can't ever get a normal camera because it's just too big and bulky. You got the matte box and the lenses. Okay. I discussed it with Andy, the director. I said, look, we can use this lens really creatively for that whole Ethelred scene because it means, we can get right. For example, when Ethelred is being killed, when it puts that.
Yeah.
Let's get like his tourniquet twisted to death.
Oh. I could get that lens on a periscope literally right under the actor's chin. So you could look right up across his ear and across the tourniquet up to the
Eardwolf, right?
James
Blackley, who plays Eardwolf, right?
And then when he's finally dead and his head locks over like that, we could pull focus to his eye, which was only that far from the lens. And it was a great shot, that. And
awesome shot.
And that's how we did it with that lens. And the same with the Edith shot that you talked about. I used the lens in its probe mode, so it's like straight mode, and it enabled us to kind of track right in and right in and right in, right through those little gaps,
the gaps,
right into that big close up of her eye, which again, with a conventional camera setup, you'd only ever be able to get the camera that maybe that far away from her. But this way we could get right into there and start the shot sort of from right over there. So in the audience, you're not thinking about it, but what it means kind of narratively is that it puts the viewer right into the sort of the headspace and the mental anguish of whoever the protagonist is at that point, because you can get so close to somebody that you really at the camera is that person.
Right.
That was our sort of philosophy behind the shooting of that whole sequence.
It was a very uncomfortable scene when he's getting his head twisted to death. Like you feel like you're him.
Yeah. Because you have that shot of Eardwolf literally like the close up on his face doing that, and that was a pretty intense moment, and it was really well done.
You've just reminded me that sequence in Hungary. We couldn't get the Optex lens, the ones that I've used in the UK. They had a similar lens called a T-Rex. It's made by PNS Technic, and it actually has far more. It's a bit bulkier, but it has far more controls. And what it has sort of within it has like these motors in the lens, so that you can attach gears to the lens motors. You can electronically control the horizon. So you can twist the horizon while the camera is electronically, like using a zoom controller, follow focus. So I remember now when we did that death scene, the camera operator was operating the camera, the focus puller was pulling focus, and I had a little remote control to the little horizon thing. So at his moment of death, and as his head went over like that as he died, I kind of turned the horizon so it just sort of kept dutching around a little bit like that, and then I think I even went back a bit, so it felt like sort of the camera was the corkscrewing into his eyes as he was dying, and it was clever.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So those tense moments, they're pretty great. And in episode 2 of season 5, we get a few tense moments. In fact, we'll have to ask you about working with Alexander Draymond as the director on this too, but at some points it sort of felt like a scary show or like an intense sort of thriller. So what was it like to work with Alexander Draymond, his first directing debut on episode 2?
He was great. I mean, what can I say? He's such a lovely man, really just extremely bright, smart, really intelligent, very creative, had super ideas. He knows the show so well. He knows the character so well. It felt like a very natural step. I mean, technically. He's, he has a lot of knowledge because he's seen everything go on around him for season after season after season. But like anything, until you've actually done it yourself, you don't quite know how things work. So, there was, we spent a bit of time just talking through all the equipment, technical stuff, what cameras, what certain things can do and what certain things can't do. If you want to track around someone, you need to use this bit of equipment, and if you want to start here and finish there, then you need to use that bit of equipment. And, there's a lot of mechanical stuff like that. He was extremely well prepared. He'd broken down the script scene by scene, knew exactly what he wanted from each scene, the characters, the camera work. And he was Alex's kind of directing mentor, so to help him kind of get, work out just simple stuff, blocking, eye lines, all the kind of mechanical stuff that's really quite boring, but needs to be done. Clearly, there are a lot of scenes where he has to direct himself. And actually, those are the scenes that then, when he was in his own scenes, then Andy would come in, Andy Hay, the director, would come in and direct those scenes, because it was, Alex would act and then he'd want to come back and check the playback, and then he'd go back and act and he'd want to check the playback. And it can be quite disruptive. So if there's a director there that's just saying, Alex, your performance is great, don't worry, move on.
That's crazy. It's like a player manager in baseball. That's crazy. Super cool.
And actually, some of those scenes were really good fun to shoot, because Alex would sort of let go a little bit. He'd direct the scene. He'd tell us all exactly what he wanted, and we'd do it. And because he was acting, he could just do his Beutrid, and we could sort of fulfill his visual dreams. It was good fun.
That's cool.
He was a great presence on set when he was directing. I mean, it was wonderful to see him with his fellow actors, directing his fellow actors, and just seeing the respect that they accorded him and how they listened to him, and how generous he was with them in terms of the way they would act with Uhtred. And it was quite a special set of relationships to witness. I felt very privileged.
Now, a moment in episode 3 that I'd love to ask you about is during the battle at Effowich. Brida's daughter Vivica walks through the battle, just kind of casual stroll through the battle. And this is a moment as a viewer, I am like, holy crap, like I'm on the edge of my seat, like she's about to get accidentally killed here. Could you talk about what it was like doing that sequence?
Well, I put a little thing on Instagram actually last week about that. Just my shot of that thing happening. So that, the director wanted that feeling of Vivica being in a sort of fugue state, not aware of what's going on around her, kind of an untouchable. And whether it's a question of the battling soldiers are leaving her alone, or whether it's just good fortune that she can walk through it. We shot her point of view with a lens baby. Basically, it's like a little toy plastic camera lens that attaches to the front of a camera, and you can bend it around so it changes the field of focus. I mean, it's like it's quite a cheap effect, but done in the right way, it can be really, really effective. And we used it in episode 5 last season, that when Ethelred's, when he wakes up, and he kind of regains consciousness briefly, and he looks up and he sees all the Eldermen all gathered around his bed. Right. And so for his point of view, I use the lens baby for that, because it made made the sort of faces feel a bit distorted, and the backgrounds look a little like they're kind of streaming away from them. And it just felt like someone's point of view as they're waking up out of a coma. But so we used that for the Vivica's walk. Obviously, it was a stunt double from behind when we followed her. But anyway, so we use a stunt double following her, because she was obviously going into all the battle and the choreography. And then we use the real actress leading her, so on her face, kind of coming back around. And slow motion, but a lot of stuff where you got props people just out of set throwing things in front of the camera and
hits her hair
and hits her hair. But it's all done right by the camera. So again, it's something, if you were there on set looking at it, you'd laugh. You'd think it all looks so silly, really. I mean, the way filmmaking done, that sort of, when you break that wall of actually how things are done, it's quite laughable. But knowing how it's going to translate on the screen is what makes it work.
Right. And when she jumps off the steeple there down to her death, or the steeple, whatever it was, the building, she jumps down. There's a moment where the camera feels like it's falling with her.
Yeah, so I'm glad you noticed that, and I'm going to send you that picture too.
Cool.
And that was an idea that I had, because I did that on Strike. I did that on Strike Back. We had a scene where one of the Navy SEAL SWAT team heroes jumps off the upper gallery of balcony of a shopping mall and just jumps down like three balconies, firing her AK-47 as she's going, and grabs a rope on the way down and swings in magically, and it
sounds amazing.
It's all fine. But so what we did with that, and she was on a wire, and I had a stuntman cameraman on a wire next to her, filming, so he was doing the drop with her, filming her as she went down. So you got that feeling of kind of the camera flying through space, but it was operated by a cameraman. So I thought that would be a great way to do the Vivica fall. So we had the stunt double on her wire, and then Levi Levanti, who's the overall stunt coordinator, who's a good cameraman in his own right. He had a wire rigged above her. So he was on that wire with the camera, and when she jumped, he jumped, and he, followed her down.
Very cool.
Filming her as she went. And, it's only a few frames, but the fact that you noticed it means that it worked.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's those small little moments that add a lot of the intensity. I mean, another small one I think of is actually the first scene in the first episode you directed on The Last Kingdom, episode 1, season 4, on that Bebbanburg beach battle, when Joseph Milson as Elfrich looks toward Bebbanburg.
Yeah,
it shows him looking. Then there's like a quick zoom in on Bebbanburg, which I thought added like a sense of urgency to him.
Okay, I
don't know if you remember that.
Well, I do. I mean, that probably would have been a post-production thing.
That was a post-production thing.
All of Bebbanburg, that was all just a CGI creation there. So I think they would have just done a just done something.
Probably a digital zoom.
Yeah, punch in that. That's something that they just enhance the moment in the edit. I think we did shoot all that stuff on zooms just for ease of moving around on the sand, because you don't want to change lenses when you're working on beaches, because you get sand and the wind gets in. So maybe maybe one of the operators just had thought, oh, this will be nice, let's do a little punch. So maybe it was an in-camera thing. I honestly don't know.
It was a kinetic scene though, just as far as, I mean, it feels like there's just people running the whole time and going with that though. So
it was great. It was a really very well coordinated, well planned scene. That again, that took months and months of planning, but it shot it very efficiently and very quickly, and we're very lucky with the weather as well, I have to say. You just don't know. In the northeast of England, it could have been blowing a gale one minute and brilliant sun the next. But we had 2 days of, bluebird skies and clear sunshine. So it made it really helped. That was kind of 90% of the work done. From my point of view, the problems that I anticipated very early on, because I mean, we shot that in May, I believe. And we first went to scout the location in January and started to work it out. Because it was a whole arena there, you were going to, the battle you're seeing everywhere, and it was a beach and the tide was coming in. I knew that if we could solve the problem of where equipment was going to be put, then we'd be able to make the scene. Because the great difficulty with filmmaking these days is that there's so much gear. Everybody brings so many just trolleys of this and video of that and lights and props, and there's just stuff everywhere, and it's always getting into shot, and you're constantly, when you turn the camera on, you're constantly having to move things, and it's a real time killer, that. So I said, look, we have, to get this scene to work the way we want it to work, there cannot be anything on the beach. We can't have any equipment there. We have to be able to turn the camera around and be able to shoot. The locations department found a kind of a sand dune on the edge, just as it's going up the cliff, with a kind of a nice little dip. It was quite big. It was probably about 20 by 10 feet. And from where you were standing on the beach, you couldn't see it because you would see right over the top. And literally, they planned it very well, and everything went into that dip. So it meant that we had a completely free field of view to point 3 cameras anywhere we wanted at any time of day, whenever the director felt like it, and it enabled us to shoot so quickly that not having any stuff to move around and hide in the back of shot really made that scene what it was, I have to say.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of what you do too, I mean, there's a lot of technical stuff, there's a lot of logistical knowledge, and then there's also, you're looking at it, I guess, as art too, right? You're trying to make it look artistic. So I mean, that's a lot kind of to juggle and handle. Like,
I know, and often that's the last thing I think about.
Yeah.
The art comes last. I have to, I mean, I don't want to sound glib, but I try and sort of think that, well, that's kind of built into my DNA. So I don't have to think about it, because I know that's just going to come out by osmosis. It's just going to happen naturally.
Okay. Yeah.
But what I do have to think about is logistics and schedule and technical stuff that requires other people's input and getting the job done right. So that's
right.
I think about all of that stuff, and then I just trust my instincts that the art will find its way out in its own way.
How did you get into this then, or what drew you to your current profession then?
Last semester at college, I went to UC Berkeley. Actually, I was a history major at UC Berkeley. I had nothing, I had no visual background at all. It was very academic. Through various things, I kind of got interested. I kind of picked up a stills camera and started taking pictures, and it just became, I just kind of sort of almost took over my life, really. I thought, wow, I just love that idea of seeing things and then developing it and getting the pictures back and composition and lighting. And I thought, well, somehow I've got to do something with this, because it was the first time in my life I'd felt something that really kind of pulled at me.
Cool.
So when I left college, I became a photographer's assistant. I got a job with a photographer, and I didn't know anything at all, but I just met this chap, and he did a lot of corporate work, but it was good experience. And I learned all about cameras and basic lighting. And then I saw Barry Lyndon at the movie theater, the Kubrick. Okay. And then when I saw Barry Lyndon, I thought that was the real epiphany. And I thought, that is what I have to do. That is kind of what that's what the meaning of all of this is to be the cinematographer on a movie like Barry Lyndon. That's all I wanted to do. And then I knew, so then I kind of found my way into film crews as a camera trainee, as a clapper loader, and I was just making my way. I was starting to focus and work as a focus puller, and then I got a place at the National Film School in England. Cool. On the cinematography course, and that was sort of it, really. That kind of got me going. But Barry Lyndon, and it's great, because every time I'm on set on The Last Kingdom doing a candlelit scene, I think, here I am making Barry Lyndon.
There you go.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. And you mentioned earlier too how that painting had inspired one scene in The Last Kingdom. Do you ever get inspired by other paintings for The Last Kingdom or anything else?
Yes, yeah, very much. I love going to galleries, and there's nothing specific, but I often see things. Like when I was in Budapest doing prep for Series 5 last year, I got there 2 weeks before everything shut down the second time. Okay. So I had like a 2-week window of kind of artistic pleasure, and I was able to get to the National Gallery there, and they had a Dürer exhibition. And I don't know whether you know he does very, very fine pencil work. The detail and the kind of crystallization of the scenes, way he rendered his scenes, was very striking. And it immediately just sort of influenced me in the way I was thinking about that series of The Last Kingdom, and those very finely kind of etched interiors where you see the texture in the woodwork and the candlesticks, the doubloons and the plates and the bed sheets. And so I thought, that's what I thought I really wanted to do this time, is create pictures that you could really feel.
Cool.
You could reach and you could just sense the three-dimensionality and the sensory nature of the subjects. And that was just from going to see a Dürer exhibition at the National Gallery in Budapest. But I mean, like many cinematographers, I love all the Dutch paintings and Bruegels and Vermeers and Rembrandts and House, and just beautiful light. Just if you just want to look at kind of classic beautiful lighting, you can't go wrong there. I've always been sort of drawn to the pre-Raphaelite. There was some British Raphaelite painters of the late 19th century, again, just for that sort of fantastic, not fantastic in a sort of brilliant way, but fantastic in a sort of fantasy-driven state of mind, and that the way they could capture sort of mystical moments with lighting and nature, and that sort of informed a lot of the way I see the world cinematographically too.
Cool.
But there's nothing hard and fast. I tend to just respond to what happens to be around me at the time. And
I know James Northcote too. James Northcote, who plays Outhelm. He's always taking photographs.
No, we would chat a lot because he had we'd always talk cameras because he had his old twin lens Rolleiflex, and I have one too. And he loves his film cameras, and he's a good photographer and really enjoys it.
Yeah, one scene I definitely want to touch on here is that Breda Uhtred finale, sort of Breda's finale, in their little battle at Lloydus, which was a super nostalgic scene for Last Kingdom fans, or a location for Last Kingdom fans. Could you talk a little bit about the approach to capturing that scene on camera?
Yes. How should I say? Kind of, it goes back to what I'm kind of touching on early with all the other big set piece scenes. It's the kind of the logistics first. And once I know about the location and the set, then I can start thinking about how I want it to look, or rather, I know how I want it to look, and therefore you kind of make sure that the design incorporates that. So it started off with that sense that it goes over quite a long period of time, that scene. So, by the time Uhtred arrives, he meets Breda, they fight, he nearly kills her, but he doesn't. They have their reconciliation, a moment of perhaps they finally buried all their differences and then she's killed. So it's, it takes place over a kind of a long period of time. And I had the sense that it'd be nice to suggest that passage of time with the light changing. So it sort of starts during the day, and the light and it kind of drops and goes through sort of sunset to evening. So it doesn't feel like he's just got there, they fight, she dies, that's it, move on. And so kind of emotionally, I thought that might add to the pathos of the scene, as if when they meet, it's quite strong sunlight, but by the time she's dead, it's the end of the day, and she's the last bit of sunlight and low light that's just kind of picking out what you want to see. Once I knew that, then when we were kind of location scouting with the director and Dominic, the designer, we knew that it was all going to be, there was a big farm estate, and we knew that we'd build it somewhere in there. We found, Dominic, the designer, found a nice kind of glade with trees on one side and kind of open reeds on the other, with a nice background and sort of brambles. And so it kind of worked quite well.
Right.
I knew which way the sun was going, where it was going to be at which times of day, and where we would have the sun, and at what point we would lose the sun, and when I'd need to start lighting it. I asked Dominic, because you're kind of building this from scratch, build it on this particular orientation, on this trajectory that'll enable us to use the sun and lighting to best effect, assuming the blocking was going to be fairly linear along the ruins of the chapel, which it was. So once I knew that was happening, I worked very closely with Jolt the gaffer, and we hid a lot of lights in the sort of thick trees to the right of the set as you're looking at it from Uhtred's point of view, so that as the sun went into those trees, I'd be able to start lighting, bringing kind of strong light, sort of evening sunset light in from that side of the set. And then when we shot it over 2 days, and I said that, we should make sure we kind of start filming at this time of day to take advantage of that, the light for when Uhtred first approaches through the trees. And then by the time when we get into their first fight, the sun was going to be over at that angle, which would work well.
Right.
And then as it sets when she's on the ground and she's, he's kind of bashing her and bashing her and bashing her, and then he stops. That's when I was able to start lighting it in to kind of start giving it that sort of sunset feel. And then the next day when we came back, we had to kind of start the day when it was sunnier. So I was able to kind of flag the sun off and keep my own lights in to kind of continue the feel from the previous. So when it gets to the climax of the scene and Stiora shoots, we were back to sort of like beautiful sunset light again. And that looked amazing. That, it worked. It went, how can I say, it just went perfectly to plan. And the lighting, the kind of the journey of the lighting felt like it reflected the journey of their spirit and her passing.
Right.
And that was really my approach to the scene. I mean, shooting wise, it was interesting. Levy had rehearsed it with stunt doubles.
Okay.
Big fight. But Alex and Emily had rehearsed themselves so well that they didn't want to use the stunt doubles. They wanted to do it themselves. And they did. So it meant we could photograph it without any trickery or having to hide anybody or cameras behind people. It was all done absolutely for real. I think the fight worked really, couldn't have been better, but it's for that reason. It was quite fun doing those there were those flashback moments. So we had to those little moments of kind of recreating.
I was going to ask if you had watch those scenes again. And,
we watched those scenes, and that scene at the very end when he's got the funeral pyre and he's looking, scene at dusk, and he thinks he sees her. We had a gigantic 20K light, which is like a really big lamp, and I put it literally right behind her, so it was kind of 6 feet away from her back, so she was blocking it, and it felt like you got all that light sort of pushing around behind her, so kind of heavenly glow for that moment.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. What I felt too, as far as the camera operation during their fight, how especially when Uhtred is just bashing her sword,
just getting the flashbacks out of her,
just getting the flashbacks. The camera's kind of moving with him. It's sort of this emotional feel that's created because obviously for Uhtred, it's such an emotional moment.
Well, it's just great camera operating. Ian Clark is the camera operator, and he's worked on that show for a lot longer than I have. He knows it better than me. He and the camera and the actors are like one thing, inseparable unit. They just work so well together that he just did what felt right at the time, the camera, and his instincts are always absolutely unswervingly correct.
Yeah, really well done, that scene. And when we talked to Chaz Bain, he talked about a lot of being the director of photography involves a little bit of luck sometimes. Yeah. And it sounds like you meticulously plan out the show way before you start filming. But are there ever any times where something went unexpected, or you captured a moment that you didn't expect that ended up becoming sort of magical, or
that happens all the time. It happens all the time. Mainly just with the daylight, because you can't, you can plan the logistics, but you can't plan. You don't know what the light is going to be like on the day 6 months ahead of time. And working in Hungary in winter, where you get that low winter light and the sunsets, and the beautiful magic hour, there are moments that, you know, you just see it and you have to respond to it there and then, and it becomes quite a kind of an epic moment. But although actually, I tell you what, there is one thing that does a lot of the scenes that we did. I think a lot of that stuff at the end, around the frozen lake, when they're in Runcorn, when they're waiting for boats to come in, that was, I mean, completely unpredictable. That it had snowed. There was like heavy snowfall and extreme cold and clear sky. So everything was covered in that hoarfrost.
Right.
That's the English word, HOAR. It's called, not the other kind.
Okay.
So it's hoarfrost. So, you know, it made the surfaces. It looked incredible. I mean, you couldn't have bought that for $1 million. And we had three days of that consistent look, and it just elevated those scenes visually beyond any expectation. And that was pure luck.
That's awesome.
Frozen lake, the frost trees, all the surfaces, the soldiers with their costumes all snowed and frozen, and icicles coming off the, you know, you can't, all that stuff, it's impossible. You can't predict, and you when you're there, you just photograph the hell out of it, because you know it's great value on the screen. But in terms of an accident, a sort of a happy accident.
Happy accident, is Bob Ross would say.
You know, the scene in, I think it's episode 2, where Sigtrygger is he's banished from Efferwick. He leaves Efferwick and he goes out into the field, and he looks back. There's that big kind of moonlight in the sky there.
Yes,
it's like
awesome
a really
shot.
kind of epic. Well, I mean, that was a bit of a mistake of mine, really. But the precursor to that, what we shot on the same night, was Uhtred and the gang arriving in Efferwick. Episode 3, when Uhtred has the heart-to-heart conversation with Sigtrygger on the ramparts after the battle. But it was stuff from various episodes, all filming outside the Efferwick gates at night, basically.
Gotcha.
And I had a big 18K lamp on a cherry picker on a hill right at the very, very far end of the field, so I could get some backlight on the horses as they rode up. And because we shot it all, it's all part of the sequence where the beloveds come and invade Efferwick. But when we set up for that scene with horses arriving, and we shot Sigtrygger leaving at the same time, the camera was on a crane, and as it came down, my big beautiful light was right in the middle of frame, and I couldn't tell the operator, well, frame it out, because it was impossible to frame out. But what happened was that just this mist came in that night. It was quite rare. I mean, a very unusual, it must have been a transition between like a cold front and a warm front. And suddenly the whole field was just covered in this blanket of very still mist. And when it went across the lamp, it just made the lamp look like the moon.
Cool.
So just enjoyed, didn't try and fight it, and just framed the whole thing, framed the lamp right in the middle, a shot right behind Sigtrygger. And I mean, it's way too bright. I mean, it looks, it doesn't look anything like the moon at all. But in that particular moment, it's quite a very heightened emotional beat. And I think you could sort of get away with a stylized bit of lighting like that sort of makes no sense technically, but sort of if the audience wants to believe it's the moon, well, then they can.
We were going
to. It was a I wouldn't say a mistake of mine, but it was something that I hadn't quite anticipated being the case.
Sure. And we talked to Ace about that scene too, and we had him on the podcast, and we talked about how cool that moment was. And then later there's another cool one where he's standing on a cliff, and I don't know if it's a drone that comes and zooms in on him, but that was a really cool moment too.
That was the second unit shot.
Yeah.
After that, the stuntman, he directed that second unit.
Gotcha. And that whole Efferwick scene too, we thought, like, where the people are crawling or like climbing over the walls.
Yeah,
it was such a cool feel. It almost felt like there were ants, like just infesting the city or something. It was a really cool.
We looked a little bit at World War Z for that.
The
zombies are kind of going into Jerusalem, and they wanted it to have that feel.
it was like a quiet build to this intense moment that's about to happen, and it was super well done.
Yeah.
That was quite.
scene.
I know technically that was quite challenging because we shot a lot of that stuff, a lot of that attack on the drone, and we couldn't use the big bird octocopter drone that takes the Alexa because it was too close to all the actors. So we had to use the little DJI Inspire, which quite a slow lens on that in terms of, so for night, to use that on night exteriors, that little Inspire needs a lot of light, a lot of light. I had to really light up that set. It's almost like Christmas to get enough exposure for the little drone. But that's just a sort of technical challenge. But I don't think it looks like normal moonlight.
Yeah.
But it
totally
was really bright. It was the way I used to light things 20 years ago when we were shooting on 100 ASA film. So
Now, looking back at your time on the show, are there any moments that stick out to you as like your favorite moments or things that you were most proud of that you captured?
Oh gosh, I'd say there are three things that stand out. I think that whole sequence on the boat going to Bebenberg that we did in series 4, which was the combination of filming for real on the lake and filming on the tank with the green screen and the sun, and seeing how difficult it was to get that right. We always had to keep moving I had to keep turning the boat around for every shot so that the light would always be right, and then very difficult sort of green screen job as well. And then shooting all the plates, and I was very proud to see that all cut together and see how sort of seamless it was between in everything we did. And actually within that sequence, probably my favorite shot of all times is the real shot that we did on the lake. I think it would have been the end of episode 1 when Uhtred is holding up his sword and the amber is lit, and you can see the landscape in the background inside Bebenberg, and it just
called back to episode 1.
It's beautiful light, and again it would have been really well. I planned it really well because I knew exactly what time of day we were going to shoot and what orientation the boat needed to be in to get that shot, and it all worked just like that. And the camera was in the right place, the light was in the right place, everything fitted together. It was just
a good feeling.
Great. I love to look back at that shot. And then I think that sort of climax of episode 8 in this current series, that long intrigue scene with the king and everyone trying to persuade him to send his forces up to Bebenberg, and his refusal to do so. The challenge was to make something visually interesting out of something that potentially on the page could be really boring, 10 pages of dialogue. It's enough to send anybody to sleep. But, so it had to, however good the writing is, if it doesn't, if it's not visually stimulating, it's not going to sustain the interest of the audience. So I had to work really, really hard to come up with a lighting and camera blocking plan with the director that would kind of sustain the drama. And that worked very well. So again, that was very gratifying to see that scene played back.
It's a great scene. Yeah.
But I think the end, the other standout scene for me is the one that you brought up earlier, that Ethelred's death and series 4.
Gorgeous scene.
Really, again, technically and artistically. I think that's when those are the things that stand out to me, that give me the greatest pleasure, is when I can combine being a technician and an artist, not one or the other, but the two together.
Right. And what in that scene specifically too, Ethelred, I love the moment when they take the bandage off and you sort of zoom in on the wound on the back of his head, and King Edward Timothy Innes is in the background too, and that kind of zooms in on him when he realizes the significance of the situation. That was awesome.
That was incredibly difficult to do. I mean, I'm glad it looks easy and you didn't think about it, but that lens, because we used that T-Rex lens so we could follow his head right up and then it's a very, very slow lens. So it means, normally the lenses we use are like a T2, so it means it's fast. So you don't need much light to get an exposure, which which is necessary in those sort of low lit candlelit situations. But with that T-Rex lens, it's an f8 lens, so you need 16 times as much light to get an exposure on that lens as you would on the normal lenses we were using. So for that scene, we'd shot all the normal drama on our normal lenses, but then I had to get the T-Rex out to do that scene. And because, usually you use those lenses for close-ups, which is quite easy because it's easy to get light in for a close-up. But that was a really wide shot, and you saw the whole room, and you saw all the elder men all arranged around, and it was quite a small room as well. Just for that one shot, I had to bring in the biggest lamps that we had on the truck, and they were just off the side of the camera, just bashed right into all the faces, and had to put a load of lights up in the eaves hidden just to get the exposure 16 times as bright as normal for it to look the same. And actually, if you look very closely, what that means is the actual candle, when you see a candle in shot, it looks a lot dimmer than normal because the lens has had to close down a lot to accommodate the extra exposure on the faces. But you can't make a candle any brighter. The candle flame is always going to be the same brightness. So that's the candle flame is 16 times less bright than it would normally be.
Right.
I tried to keep the candles as invisible as possible in the background because I knew that would be a bit of a giveaway if you saw them. But there is the odd one in there. So
that reminds me of a moment in the first episode of season 4 when Uhtred's alone in his hall and he's sitting at the fireplace. And I don't know if this is how you guys did it, but it looks like all the candles in the fireplace are extinguished. And like while that happens, the natural light comes in to show the passing of time that he's been sitting at this fire contemplating all night. Is that how you guys did it?
Yes, we did that. I had a special lamp rigged up with a special spotlight going into a mirror to kind of create a shaft of sunlight. And we had that on a dimmer. As that transition was happening, I dimmed that light up to kind of create sunlight and dimmed the sort of everything else down. Now, what I'm trying, I can't remember now whether, did the candles go in? Did they actually extinguish during that shot?
I think so. I thought they did.
I think what we did then was we must have done 2 passes. I think that's what we did. We did 2 passes on the shot, one with the candles lit and one with the candles unlit. So in post, what they did was they took, they did the shot with the transition, the lighting transition, and then they took the candles and then comped the 2 candles together to make them look like they were extinguishing themselves.
I thought it was a creative way to show the passing of time. It was pretty cool.
No, that was an idea that it was something I thought would be good to do for that. But it was a very particular type of lamp to get that effect. It's called a mole beam, which is an old-fashioned type of Klieg light, the type of spotlights that you would have outside movie theaters in the 40s. The big the big shafts of light going into the sky, and then when you shine that into a mirror, you reflect it into a mirror, it creates an even more distinct shaft of light.
Okay, cool.
Ooh, one thing we forgot to ask too was Iceland. What about when Brita in Iceland? Was there anything unique with that?
Not really. We just filmed it in a quarry. Quarry and most, quarry in a lake, and 90% of those shots is like great CGI, great backgrounds. What we filmed was pretty small. There wasn't that much to it. And it was lovely, that kind of opening scene where she's skipping along the rocks, and I had a little bit of fun with lighting to kind of create a volcano effect lighting on Brida's face as the thing erupts. But it would have been nice to have had a bit more time to do that. We could have sort of had bigger shots with more extras, but we always knew it was going to be a big CGI heavy.
Gotcha. And do you have anything exciting coming up here in the future? I know you mentioned to us you're working in Boston University.
I'm working in Boston, teaching here at the moment. I'm waiting to hear on some filming work over the summer. I can't say anything yet.
Right.
I don't know, but I've been reading scripts and having meetings. So we'll see see what comes up.
Very exciting. And what kind of career goals do you have? Is there anything that you haven't done yet that you still really like to do?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I've taught a lot over the years. I mean, I've been going back into the National Film Schools since the kind of mid 2000s, doing masterclasses and workshops. And I when this opportunity at Boston University came up, I thought, well, it was just felt like the right time in my life to, rather than to think so much about myself and my own career and what I've done, because I feel like I've done so many wonderful things that I wanted to really, I know how hard it is because I've been there. I know how difficult it is to get started in this business, and any help you can get is really of such good value that I thought, well, I want to give it back now and help the next generation find their way. That's really my goal now, is to try and get as many young, talented cinematographers into the industry as possible. And
very cool.
And if I can keep picking up some interesting filming work in my time off, then that's just it's a win-win situation.
Cool.
But in terms of I have to say, I think, gosh, would I like to go and do the next Marvel movie? And to be honest, I mean, if the opportunity came up, I'd certainly consider it. But
sure,
I love what I've done, and I love the people I've worked with, and I know I'm going to work with them again. And I'm sort of extremely happy with the quality and level of work that I've achieved in my career. And now it's great to be able to sort of spread my wings a little bit and as I said, give something back to the industry.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks for chatting with us today. I mean, we one of the big things we love about The Last Kingdom is the cinematography, and we've always loved the feel and the look of the show, and
feels real.
And a lot of my favorite moments are actually a lot of the ones that you've done, especially like visually. Episode 1 of season 4, I just love the sunlight and the amber hilts and all that fun stuff. Like, that's when I think of the show, like that's a moment I think of, like visually. I think of the Ethelred scene. I think of actually episode 6. I know that wasn't one you did, but when they're Sitchiger's death, and just like the frost and the lighting and the dark, like there was a lot of just visually awesome moments from The Last Kingdom. So it's great to be able to talk with you and about that today.
It's been great talking to you. I don't think I've ever talked about The Last Kingdom as much as this.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, thanks, Tim. And everybody listening, we appreciate you listening. Check out Tim's links down below. He put some great behind-the-scenes stuff from his works on his Instagram. And definitely check out his website down below as well. Anything else you want to say to The Last Kingdom fans, Tim?
Well, to Bebenberg and I can't wait to see the movie. They've just got a movie. It's going to be incredible. And Ed Bazalgette directed that, so it's going to be great. Not from a filming point of view, but as a historian, from university, I did early medieval history. That was my kind of concentration, so I know the whole period very well. Bernard Cornwell's books, and I read a lot of his other books as well. It's so historically accurate. And what's fascinating is the way he has this ability to interweave fictional characters, completely made up characters, into events that really happen. And you sort of walk away feeling that these are real people, that it really happened.
I know.
And I go back and I read my history books and I said, well, hang on a minute, where's Uhtred? He's meant to be in this. He's meant to be here. But I know that he's not there. But I sort of almost been, tricked into believing that he is. So.
Yeah. Well, that's the other cool part about the show, is this show reveals a very interesting time period and piece of history that I think before the show was not talked about much. I mean, Athelflaed and King Alfred and Edward, these people who did amazing things for their time, especially Ethelflaed. It's cool.
That whole storyline, the White Queen of Mercia, is absolutely historically, factually correct the way it was.
It's amazing. So, and that's cool too, I guess, for you being a historian, to be a part of something that teaches other people about this amazing history, which is cool. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And as we always say, goodbye, and destiny is all. Destiny is all.